God afton och shalom vänner, profetisk uppdatering 30 januari 2024. Jag vill läsa en del ur en artikel här. Men det handlar här om det som har hänt nu det senaste då amerikanska styrkor har attackerats och flera dödats. Det var ju väldigt uppmärksammat igår på alla nyheter. Många skadade. Och vad händer nu? I USA frågar man ju, är vi i krig? Det är den stora frågan. Vad kommer att hända? Och samtidigt som allt det här sker så är det så tryggt att ha bibelordet, att ha Bibeln, Guds ord. Och vi ser inte allt, vi har inte alla detaljer i det som pågår, det som sker. Men i stora drag så ser vi hur bibelordet går i uppfyllelse. Hur de olika länderna intar de positioner som är förutsagda i profetian. Och hur mäktigt är inte det att veta att Gud har yttersta kontroll. Han vet vad som kommer. Han vet i förväg. Vi vet ju genom de uppenbarelser, profetiska drömmar som står om i Daniels bok att Europa kommer att vara väldigt starka. Amerika nu, USA som anses ganska svagt idag, kommer inte att vara den stormakt som liksom är den starka, om man säger så. Sen kan man se olika, som man har sagt med EU, först EU och sen FN. Det man börjar med i EU skulle sen göras globalt genom FN. Och där får man vara lite beredd på att det kan vara globalt samtidigt som makten utgår från Europa och det nyuppståndna så att säga romarriket i ny tappning. Som Daniels bok då talar om. Men i vilket fall så är det ändå tryggt att veta att Gud har kontroll över allt detta. USA anses svagt som sagt. Det är ju så i Mellanöstern och i de här staterna där nere, muslimska stater, där är man svag om man inte agerar kraftigt. Slår tillbaka eller försvarar sig. Amerika vill inte heller ha något storkrig där nere i Mellanöstern. Och bra är ju det, men det är väl det är ju stor risk för att det kan bli större och det är ju Iran framförallt som ligger bakom det. Men jag läser den här artikeln av Michael Snyder. Han skriver: amerikanska styrkor i Mellanöstern har attackerats gång på gång under de senaste månaderna. Men söndagens attack var den första som faktiskt dödade medlemmar av den amerikanska militären. 3 amerikanska tjänstemän dödades och dussintals skadades. Nu vet vi ju senare framkommer att det var 34 som skadades. Efter en obemannad flygdrönsattack mot amerikanska styrkor stationerade i nordöstra Jordanien nära den syriska gränsen, sa president Joe Biden och amerikanska tjänstemän på söndagen. Biden anklagade Iran-stödda grupper för attacken, den första dödliga attacken mot amerikanska styrkor sedan Israel-Hamas-kriget bröt ut i oktober och skickade chockvågor i hela Mellanöstern. Det var bara en tidsfråga innan något sådant hände. Totalt sett har amerikanska trupper i Irak och Syrien attackerats mer än 150 gånger sedan den 17 oktober. Iransk-stödda miliser har genomfört mer än 150 attacker sedan 17 oktober på baser ockuperade av amerikanska trupper i Irak och Syrien enligt Pentagon. Majoriteten av attackerna har skett med raketer och envägsdrönare, varav de flesta har avlyssnats. När någon attackerar dina styrkor mer än 150 gånger är du i krig med dem. Alla som tror något annat är bara vanföreställningar. Som svar på söndagens attack sa Joe Biden till världen att vi kommer att hålla alla ansvariga till svars vid en tidpunkt och på ett sätt som vi väljer. De som uppmanar till militära attacker mot mål inne i Iran antar att iranierna bara har konventionella vapen. Men vad händer om detta inte är sant? Faktum är att det under lång tid har varit många som har försökt varna oss för att det inte är sant. Iranierna visar inte alla sina kort och de har förberett sig för denna uppgörelse i årtionden. Intressant nog har iranierna just lanserat 3 nya satelliter i rymden. Man tror att dessa satelliter har skickats i omloppsbana i syfte att styra ballistiska missiler. Vi är så nära det otänkbara. När missiler väl börjar flyga över hela regionen kommer Mellanöstern aldrig att bli sig likt igen. Under tiden fortsätter kineserna att undersöka Taiwans försvar. Taiwans försvarsminister meddelade på lördagen att över 30 kinesiska stridsplan var på väg mot dess land förutom flottans fartyg. 33 flygplan sändes av den kinesiska folkets befrielsearmé från klockan 6 på fredagen till klockan 6 på lördagen, sa tjänstemän. Flygplanet inkluderade Su-30 jaktplan. En apokalyptisk konflikt i Mellanöstern skulle ge Kina den perfekta möjligheten att försöka återförenas inom citation med Taiwan med våld. Låt oss hålla ett öga på kineserna. Det är ju så. Ofta så att händer det någonting så här, men nu har vi ju alla väldigt fokus på Israel och Mellanöstern och naturligtvis händer mycket mer hela tiden som vi får ha ögonen på. Och låt oss inte glömma ryssarna. Under helgen tog de ännu mer territorium från ukrainarna. Det här är en tid av krig och rykten om krig. Jesu ord i Matteus 24. Och det som är bekanta med mitt arbete kommer inte att bli förvånade över att höra att jag tror att saker och ting kommer att eskalera kraftigt senare i år. Vi bör hoppas på fred, men vi bör också förbereda oss för krig. För krig kommer definitivt, och det kommer att skaka miljarder ur deras nuvarande tillstånd av självgodhet. Slut citat. Så skriver alltså Michael Snyder. Och här kommer 2 video med svensk text då. Den första är ganska kort, den är från Pentagon. USA vill inte ha ett vidare krig med, eller utbredare krig med Iran eller i Mellanöstern, heter den. Är detta en krigsförklaring från Iran? Det som har hänt alltså. Och enligt Pentagon så är det Iranstödda Hizbollah som låg bakom attacken, svarar han från Pentagon när han får frågan direkt. Det är de som också härjar i Libanon och som ständigt attackerar Israel i norra delen från Libanon då. Den andra videon är från CBN. Den heter också Krig med Iran? Frågetecken. Så här kommer mer om detta som då har hänt med dessa amerikanska soldater, militären, och vi får följa upp det som sker. Så får vi påminna oss om det Jesus också säger, att vi ska inte frukta, vi ska lita på Herren. Vi ska lita på honom. Då är vi trygga. Det är lätt att säga när vi sitter här trygga i Sverige. Visst är det. Men det är alltid till Herren vi får gå. Och det är honom vi får lita på och lägga våra liv i hans händer. Då vet vi att vi är trygga. Vad som än händer är han med i och genom allt. Jag önskar er Guds välsignelse och shalom.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much for having me. As you highlighted, 3 U.S. service members killed at a facility in northeast Jordan along the Syria border. The number of injuries has risen to at least 34. 8 of those had to be evacuated outside of Jordan, all of whom are in stable condition at this point in time. There is the potential that the number of injuries could rise as individuals are further diagnosed, for example, from concussive impacts. So we'll continue to keep the public updated on that front. I do obviously want to offer our thoughts and prayers to the families of those who got the most terrible news over the weekend and lost loved ones, as well as those that were injured.
Absolutely. General Ryder, thanks for being with us. It isn't now the case that the American people need to prepare themselves for more deaths, for more wounded American service members at the hands of Iran and Iranian proxies?
Well, as we've said, and will continue to be the case, we will take necessary action to protect our U.S. forces, no matter where they're serving around the world. I'm not going to telegraph or forecast any potential response from the United States because of this attack, other than to say there will be a response, and this kind of action will not be tolerated. You know, U.S. forces are in this region for one reason only, and that is to focus on the lasting defeat of ISIS. And so, again, we will do whatever we need to do to protect our forces going forward, but certainly, at the end of the day, we are not looking to engage in a wider conflict, merely to ensure regional security and stability.
Does the administration think proportional attacks will change the situation in the Middle East?
Well, again, you know, what we're going to do is we will take deliberate, appropriate action. Our focus here is not to broaden a conflict from the very beginning. We've been very focused on ensuring that the situation in Israel does not broaden into a wider regional conflict. Unfortunately, what you have here are Iranian proxy groups that are exploiting the situation and conducting these types of illegal attacks against forces that are in the region to actually preserve peace and stability. So, again, we're going to do what we need to do to protect our forces, while also cognizant of the fact that what we don't want is a wider regional conflict.
But would you consider what happened over the weekend, given the fact that in Jordan, this is a facility about terrorism, this is a training facility, we have Americans dead now. Is this now a red line for the administration with Tehran?
Well, look, again, as I highlighted, any attack against U.S. forces is unacceptable, and certainly the loss of 3 of our warriors is something that saddens us all, and we will respond in a time and a manner of our choosing. But again, our focus in the region is not to be there to widen conflict or to create more instability. It's the opposite. So again, we will take necessary action to protect our forces while also working toward that end of regional security and stability.
General, you said that any attack on our troops would be unacceptable. There have been more than 150 attacks on troops in Iraq and Syria since October 17th. How much do you think that what you've done so far, what the administration has done so far, has effectively subdued additional attacks, has sufficiently protected some of these troops?
Well, to your point, there's been over 150 rocket and UAV attacks, and to this point, those air defense systems have worked extremely well in terms of protecting our forces. You know, we're taking a look at this situation here and how this UAS was able to strike this facility and kill and wound U.S. service members. But again, everywhere that we have forces, we're going to take all necessary measures to protect those forces.
Is this an act of war by Iran?
Well, look, it's certainly a horrific act, and it's certainly something that's unacceptable, and we will respond appropriately. But if we take a step back here again, the United States' focus is not to go into these regions to instigate war and escalation. Our focus is to work with regional partners and allies to ensure security and stability. That's why these forces were there. You all remember about 10 years ago when ISIS was 24 kilometers outside of Baghdad. We don't want to go back to those times. And so that's what our focus is. But when our forces are threatened and when they're attacked, we will take appropriate action.
Who conducted these attacks? Can we just start there and really get into the detail of that? General, who conducted? Who were the perpetrators behind these attacks?
Yeah, so what we know right now is we are very confident that these attacks, this particular attack against this facility was by Iranian-backed proxies. We're working through the actual attribution piece right now, but of course it carries the signature of Kataib Hezbollah, which has conducted attacks in the past. But this is something that we continue to look at specifically.
And when you look at this, just for people following this and listening to what's been developing in the Middle East over the last month or so, how big is the difference between those groups and Iran themselves?
Well, for a long time, Iran has used proxy groups around the region to enable itself to have plausible deniability, enable itself to implement policy, and importantly, to essentially try to expel the United States and other countries that are at odds with its own policies and views from the region. And so this is, in a large part, what you are seeing in Iraq and Syria is that these proxies, and to a degree Iran, exploiting the situation, the tensions in the Middle East in an effort to try to expel the United States and the coalition from Iraq and Syria. And again, those forces, particularly in Iraq, are there at the invitation of the government of Iraq to assist in the lasting defeat of ISIS. That is the mission that we're there for, and that's what we continue to remain focused on.
Does Iran have plausible deniability this morning?
Look, we know that these groups are backed by Iran with the support of Iran. They organize, train, and equip these groups, and we will hold them accountable.
You will hold Iran accountable or these groups accountable? And I think, Major General, as you know, this is the issue. Which one is it?
Look, again, I'm not going to telegraph or forecast our response. We know that Iran is behind these groups. We're not seeking conflict with Iran. We don't seek war with Iran. But again, we will take necessary measures to protect our forces, and we will respond in a time and manner of our choosing.
I think we understand that's the position of the government this morning. So, Major General, forgive me for following up on this, but I understand the U.S. doesn't seek war with Iran. Does Iran seek war with the U.S.?
Well, look, I'm not going to speak for Iran. I'm not an Iranian government spokesperson. We know that their actions and their malign activity around the region are certainly contrary to peace and stability. But we will continue to remain focused on our goal, which is regional peace, security, and stability. But again, if our forces are threatened, we will take appropriate action. We will ensure that those forces will be defended.
General,
service members killed, more than 30 injured. An attack by Iranian-backed militia against a U.S. base in Jordan is raising the stakes in the Middle East.
President Bush pledges the United States will respond to the attack. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, the escalation raises the risk of a direct conflict between the United States and Iran.
At an event in South Carolina, President Biden announced the U.S. would choose the time and place for its response.
I'm asking for complete silence from all three of those small soldiers. And we shall respond. God bless you all.
The attack also wounded at least 30 soldiers. The base is located in Jordan, near the borders of Syria and Iraq. It serves as a special operations base to fight ISIS. Iranian-backed militias have attacked U.S. bases in Syria and Iraq more than 170 times since October 17th. The American deaths raise the stakes dramatically in the region.
It's quite clear that the whole players in the region are actually looking to see what will be the United States' reaction to that.
Some congressional leaders are calling on Biden to impose crippling costs on the regime, including military strikes inside Iran. Israeli and U.S. conflicts against Iran proxies are spread throughout the region, including Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, who continue attack shipping in and around the Red Sea, and Hamas in Gaza. Avi Melamed is a former Israeli intelligence official. He says the source address of all the conflicts in the region is Iran.
This is the Mullah regime in Tehran. We have today sample of the disastrous vision and future that waits the Middle East and the world if the Mullah regime is not going to be restrained forcefully.
Also over the weekend, the U.S., along with a number of other countries, suspended funding to UNRWA. The New York Times reported Israel presented evidence that UNRWA employees participated in the October 7th attacks, which killed more than 1,200 Israelis. The White House said the suspension of aid might be a first step.
We'll certainly consider additional, depending on the investigation, whether that requires any additional changes in the way we support UNRWA going forward.
The UN says it's investigating the charges, but critics of UNRWA said it's been part of the problem, not the solution, for a long time. Adi Schwartz is the co-author of The War of Return.
I just want to remind you that cases of people working for UNRWA and at the same time working for terrorist organization has begun in the 60s.
Meanwhile, negotiations continue to release the more than 100 hostages in Hamas captivity. Israel said talks have been constructive, but there are still significant gaps. The deal would include a pause in the fighting in exchange for the release of some or all of the hostages.
Well, Chris Mitchell joins us now with more from Jerusalem. It's obvious that I don't think anybody, but everyone I talk to in the U.S. doesn't want to escalate this into a war. But it seems like Biden may be forced to. What are the pros and cons of directly striking Iran?
Well, Gordon, right now the region's really waiting to see how the U.S. is going to react because of Sunday's attack. And the 170 attacks on the U.S. bases since mid-October, many Mideast observers here believe that the U.S. is going to respond forcefully. One of the cons is that it would escalate the situation, Gordon. On the other hand, one of the things you have to regard is that if the U.S. doesn't respond forcefully, it's going to make the U.S. perceived as weak, as more than it is right now. So you have to weigh both the pros and the cons here. The Joint Chiefs of Staff is saying that they just want to escalate the situation. It might not be possible to de-escalate the situation now because Iran keeps pressing the envelope, not only in the Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq, but also the Houthis. So it looks like right now the whole region could be on a knife's edge and see how the U.S. is going to react.
Well, a lot of international law has been quoted recently. So just under international law, what the Houthis are doing, firing missiles at international shipping, is an act of war. And under international law, there needs to be a response to that. What Iran is doing through its proxies to attack U.S. troops in Iraq and now in Jordan, Syria, those are acts of war. And so if we don't respond appropriately, I can't help but think that the entire region, the entire world, will think that we're weak, and it will embolden all kinds of actions, not just in the Middle East. What's the Israel government saying about the American response?
Well, they're waiting, I think, for the kind of response we're going to get right now from the U.S., whether it's, the President Biden said it's going to be a time of their choosing and the way they're going to respond. But I think Israel would feel like the U.S. really has to step forward and have a strong response in order to have some deterrence against Iran and its proxies. And if it doesn't, it seems like these attacks by the Houthis, by the Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq, by Hezbollah, they will just keep increasing until the U.S. really does respond. I've been reading recently about how President Reagan back in the 80s responded to Libya and tried and deterred them. So we'll just see what the U.S. does. But right now, the U.S. is perceived as fairly weak in the region, and it's really a crossroads right now to see how the administration is going to respond.